What made you quit a job, on the spot? Nothing dramatic. After working my ass off during the pandemic and promised an additional bonus, I received a low performance review, conveniently timed a day before my bonus was to be paid. The low performance feedback cancelled my bonus. Given all the other bullshit I was putting up with, I broke and quit. I had a nice month off, and my new job pays significantly more. Never work for people that don't appreciate you, there are always others that will. I unfortunately work for a company that is currently doing this to me. Busted my ass all through the pandemic. I work on healthcare equipment, working 12 to 15-hour days regularly. Got the attaboys from the company and managers, and was promised a pretty substantial bonus. The end of the fiscal year rolls around and we got our overtime cut, instead of the bonus, due to unprotected expenditures, yet the corporate guys and managers got 5-figure bonuses for weathering out the storm of the pandemic and succeeding beyond expectations. This was the final confirmation I needed to start looking for a different position. Edit, I know I should leave and would love to. However, that would put me at risk of losing out on great first-time home buyer grants and rates, due to the income cap. My apartment flooded a couple months ago and repairs were shoddy. Don't get me started, it's a long story, so, instead of me at the end of my lease just renewing the lease, I normally would and just save more. I am just on the track to buy a house within a few months. Instead of moving out of my apartment with covered up water damage, only to move into another apartment, it's financially better for me to get into a house with some land, before getting into a new job. I appreciate the advice and support, y'all are great. I used to cut grass in a cemetery. I used a push lawnmower, and had to lift it up onto the elevated graves, and then back down and on, to the next one. Over and over and over. Minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. After an hour of cutting grass, in the August heat, I sit down for my break, and this guy named Leroy asks, "Was that worth $4.25 to you?" I quit the next day. Thanks Leroy. Asked for a raise and was told okay. Next morning, Friday, I was told by the same person, who agreed with the raise, that I should put a few more years in, and then we'll talk again. Locked my toolbox, at the end of the day, and called a tow truck to pick it up. Shop manager was shocked that next Monday to find an empty spot where my tools were, and couldn't understand why I left. You are braver than me. I was told I'd get a raise and stuck around, waiting for it for 6 months, before finally jumping ship. This was after 4 years of my career with no change in pay whatsoever and consistent, good quality work. Now I advocate for myself. My grandfather, who I considered like a father, passed away after a long stay in hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day of his funeral off, since I was organizing part of the arrangements, and having a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral finally comes and the staff start calling me, leaving me messages, asking why I'm not at my shift, and telling me, while I'm in a suit, hosting family members at the funeral home, that I have to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out, and never looked back. Walked into the interview, everything went well, accepted the job offer. Went to the front desk, to do the paperwork, and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount, and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 per week. I asked first about the amount difference, was told, "Oh, this the standard contract, it just hasn't been updated for your specific offer." I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. "Oh, that's not how things work here." I thanked them for their time and left, without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to have started asking where I was. I told them because didn't sign the contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. Similar situation for me. Back in 2012, I was looking for a job in anything other than food but got desperate. This burger place had just opened up and was desperate for workers. They advertised on their window $11.75 an hour starting for all positions. I applied, had an interview basically the second I turned in my application and got hired 20 minutes later. At the end of my shift, which was about 3 hours, they said they would start me at minimum wage, because you haven't finished your bachelor's degree yet. I was speechless. If I had finished my bachelor's degree, why would I be working here? And for such low pay? I told them to cash out my pay immediately and I would not be returning, because of their deceit. There weren't any stipulations anywhere on the sign that said anything about needing an undergrad degree for that much pay. They cashed me out at $11.25 per hour and I left. They closed down back in 2018 and every year, Spirit Halloween takes over the location. FM. Worked for a privately owned bakery for exactly 1 week. The owner's son comes in, walks past the counter and into the bathroom. He comes out, a few minutes later, without acknowledging me or my coworker, gets into his car and drives away. We both looked at each other, then opened the door, only to find this guy literally shit all over the toilet seat and the toilet paper holder. I called the owner, told her what happened and she said to deal with it. So I asked my coworker if she wanted to clean it up, because I wasn't going to. She declined, and I told her I was walking out. She did as well. We locked up the store, and told the owner we quit, but would reconsider staying if her son came back to clean up his own mess. She yelled and berated us for 20 seconds, before I said goodbye and hung up. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman, where I work. I work underground and it isn't for everybody, terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual starting working, and after a few weeks, decided that it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give him 2 weeks notice, and without missing a beat, the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks you're gonna notice that I'm not here," turned around, packed his shit and left. Was never heard from again. I worked for T-Mobile store, authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. 1 week, I had an amazing week, sold 55 phones, brand new activations on a business account, with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order, and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork, in case this happened, so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order, and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office, and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections, and they did settle, before I took them to court. The company did go out of business, after a few years, because they tried that with many other employees and eventually lead to an investigation by the government, according to an old coworker I bumped into years later. Worked as a cashier in a local shop. One night, 2 guys came at me with knives, trying to get in the till. I just walked away and said, "Having it," as it wasn't worth the minimum wage to get into it with a couple of guys waving knives at me. After they ran out the store, I picked up my mobile and called the police, then called the store manager. The next day, the district manager meets me as I turn up for my shift the very next day. Her first words were, "It was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while in work." I laughed at her, and told her she could take this as my notice and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up, but the sheer gall of that got me. I got mugged on a delivery for Domino's, and came back to the shop crying and panicked, had my phone, wallet, and pizza taken, told my manager what happened. "Anon, are you hurt?" "No, but I lost my phone and wallet, I need to call the police." "No time for that, here's your next delivery." It was like 2 blocks from where I was just mugged. I just went home. The police never really did much to get my phone and wallet back, not like they could. Began working at a Persian restaurant in the kitchen. I overcooked a steak slightly. The owner came back, threw a plate at us, then a hot meat skewer, before storming off to his office. I dropped my apron, grabbed my bag and told him I was leaving. His response was, "Okay, at the end of the night, you can go." My response was, "Clearly you don't understand. I'm leaving right now. Here's my parking pass, I'll expect my check in the mail." I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy, with a small fries, and drink for our lunch break. One day, when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal, because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed, and started walking towards the break room, until he yelled at me not to walk away from him, in front of customers and my co-workers. I couldn't believe it. This grown-ass successful businessman was hounding at 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. Told him I wasn't gonna pay, put the food down and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend. I told them, no thanks, and never went back. LOL, I had an inside hint from HR that there was about to be mass layoffs and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation and returning the day before layoffs were presumed to have happened. My boss reamed me out for daring to take a vacation. She said I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in a project to take a vacation. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on a vacation before project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for the week I was away anyways, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was mad and said that she was upset with me for having left, and made her take care of my project for me, chewed me out in front of the entire company in the conference room. I chilled and was like, "Aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so I can collect unemployment." Entire room literally starts panicking, and management tries to understand how the F I knew about layoffs. It was my one true Regina George causing chaos moment in my life. Worked for a restaurant/pub. The owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time, a lot of times forcing the bartender to stay way past close, serving them. Obviously was told not to charge anything, because it's the owner's party. After hours of drinks on the house, no tip. Not even from the owner. This started to happen frequently. Usually, we'd put up with it if they'd leave or be done before close. Then we started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were being paid because we made like $4 an hour. But the kitchen wasn't a tipped kitchen and made a decent wage. Turns out, the owner was a total drunk F-wit, which should have been obvious, and buried himself in debt. A week later we were told our checks weren't there on the day they were supposed to be. Then 2 days later still no checks. I told them, if my check wasn't there tomorrow, I won't come in for my shift. They said it came. I got there, and they said, well, what I meant was, it's actually on the way. I talked to the and I walked out. I later found out no checks were ever issued there again. They tried to pay some people cash, but it fell apart very soon after. Edit, for those guessing the place, this was about 12 years ago, and it went out of business not too long after I left. Someone else bought it, renamed it, and made it work, and now, I believe, it's still there, and operating quite well. I worked for an attorney. I was 7 months pregnant. I was supposed to be a secretary, but instead I was constantly being sent out as a process server. In July, at the end of my 3 months, August, I was supposed to get a raise, and she said that she couldn't give me a raise. The day she said that, I left at lunch and never went back. She was an awful person, and the guy I replaced told me that he felt sorry for me on my first day as he was leaving. I should have left that day. I got blamed for something that wasn't my fault, was in an argument with our VP or marketing, because I had the audacity to suggest a solution that would have avoided our problem, instead of accepting fault for something I didn't do. He told me he doesn't pay me to think, so that was my last day. I had a manager tell me, I don't pay you to think, I pay you to work. The owner overheard and told him, if this guy, me, has a good idea, you better effing consider it. Manager goes back to the owner and says, if you want him to think, then he can think his way into my manager job. And stormed away. Got fired shortly thereafter. I did not get his job. LOL. I worked at Walmart for a short time. I worked as hard as I possibly could to unload their pallets of merchandise. I always thought I was so damn fast. I studied the process, and I believed I perfected it. Every single day, my manager came up to me and told me I needed to be faster. So I did, and the fast pace made me lose a little focus, causing me to break a finger. I let management know that I might be a little slower due to my injury, and they straight up told me, we won't tolerate any laziness, and wrote me up when I didn't meet their ridiculous standards. So, I went home after my shift, and never returned. Never called, never formally quit. I just never came back. F Walmart. I was at a company for about 1.5 years, as an assistant project manager. In that 1.5 years, I had 3 different bosses, the newest one being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20% below the standard salary for the position, overworked without any additional compensation, and the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day. I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming, and I just cut her off and said, I'm not doing this shit anymore, I quit. She yelled back, well, I need it in writing, And I said back with the straightest face, I don't have to do shit in writing. I quietly packed all my stuff up, said good luck to my coworkers, and left. A year later, after working a couple of other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and make almost twice as much as I was making at the previous. And I get to post on Reddit while at work without getting yelled at. Fun times. Working at a grocery store when I was a teenager. I was still out on my own, but working anything I could to make ends meet. I guess I didn't work hard enough, being a one-man crew in front of a store manager who decided to tell me to go faster, impossible, and do even better for my 4.25/hour. I tried explaining I was going as fast as personally possible when he decided to say, "You'll do what you are told, as fast as you're told, if you want to keep this job. You should be so lucky." Decided right then and there, bro, I'd rather starve than work for some stupid F whose high point in life is the assistant manager at a buy/low grocery store. Quit on the spot. Edit. Holy jeez. Never expected this to blow up this fast or like this at all. That being said, never compromise your self-worth for a job. You are worth more than that, and you should bet on yourself always. I was asked to lie to parents and cover up a kid failing in elementary school by support staff. When I confronted the principal about it, he said that she was just doing her job, and I was not a team player for not doing so. So, I explained the situation. Same response, I should have helped in covering it up. As soon as kids went home, I started emptying my desk. How do you cover up a kid failing? Like the parents aren't going to notice, he's in 3rd grade again? Kid started in my class in grade 5, in Belgium, so 10 years old, but she was put on a personalized path and given math and Dutch at a grade 3 level. She basically continued this path but never did really well. At the end of grade 6, kids either graduate or they don't. If you do, you get to go to certain middle/high schools. If you don't, some schools are no longer accessible, but you can of course still go to another high school. This, of course, was a big no-no. So, they told parents that because she was doing so well at a grade 4 level, when she was in grade 6, she could just move up with the other kids who did complete their classes at a grade 6 level. And I said she couldn't. Parents were split. The father understood, and since I had talked to him privately, he knew. Mother on the other hand was furious. Every conversation I ever had with her was with the support staff present, by the request of said support staff, and they always continued afterwards. Turns out, she had promised the mother the kid could just graduate. Well, I mean, I know it happened in other grades as well, and I also know several teachers knowingly put different grades in the reports, rather than their actual grades, to make everybody happy, and make sure kids didn't feel bad. This was brought to the attention of said support staff, and the principal later on by someone else. I didn't work there anymore, but nothing came of it. So well, education in Belgium. Some schools just suck. I get a job at a restaurant. First day I show up and the heat is broken in the dead of winter. It was like 35 degrees. I asked the cooks if it's always like this, and they say, yes. I walked immediately. I've worked in the opposite kitchen, where the AC was out, and the oven door was broken, so it remained ajar by 3 inches, while we baked pies, biscuits, bacon and whatnot. Standing in a hot kitchen for 8 hours, in those sweatbox conditions, was awful, especially cooking at the stove with that broken over door at my legs. I started showing up in shorts and was told it was unsafe, that you could splatter hot oil on your legs. I walked out of that $4 per hour job. I was 18. On my lunch, a drunk manager came in the break room, asked me a bunch of invasive personal questions, and when I was curt and evasive, she exited the room, closed the door, and announced to the office, "What a bitch." Gathered my stuff and walked out. An assistant manager followed me out and tried to block my car from pulling out of the parking lot. I pulled around him and left. Heard later that the story going around the office was that I almost ran him down in the parking lot. Not even close. Had a job about 10 years ago, doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage plus bonuses you earn for selling people stuff. And by stuff, I mean terrible, overpriced services that you can get online for free. I was still in the phase of training, where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls, and after a call, he told me I should have paused to try and sell him some shitty antivirus service before I fixed his problem. Handed in my headset right there. Felt so skivvy when people call you for help, and you have to turn into a telemarketer. Worked at a restaurant as a server. We just catered a large wedding reception. The owner's wife was chatting with the wedding party all night, and occasionally getting the drinks. At the end of the night, she said she's taking her share of the tips since she helped so much. I say fine, even though that's illegal in our state. An hour and a half after the party ends, the restaurant is still a mess, and the owner's wife is just standing around talking, while I was supposed to clean up. It was almost midnight and I'd worked my other job earlier that day. I walked out without saying a word. They ended up giving me all of my tips on my last check. The boss wanted my team to work extra shifts, without weekends, to finish a project next milestone, so we can show the client that we are capable of finishing before the due date. We worked 14 hours daily, for 4 weeks, with no weekends, and the last 2 days we worked for 36 hours straight, with no breaks, since the due date was a day 8 to 1 way. Everyone was effed and on the edge, no smiles, no small talks, nothing. And we don't get paid overtime. After finishing the milestone, he thanked us, and called us for a meeting, saying we have to continue working like this for an unknown period, until they hire new staff members. I refused with another colleague and said, we will work for what we get paid for, which is 9 hours per day, 5 days a week. He didn't take us seriously, but we didn't give a F at that moment. We worked the next 2 weeks accordingly. He called us and said that he was extremely disappointed and that we don't value the company. I walked out, collected my stuff, faced my resignation letter to the HR, and said bye. I worked at a certain children's entertainment place, known for having birthday parties with pizza and a rat mascot. I was a party hostess. Little boy, probably 7 or so, took a really long time to blow out his candles, so I leaned in. He was making his wish, for man's name, to stop touching him. I immediately went to my manager with it. He told me that I couldn't do anything with this information. At the time, I wanted to discuss it with the mother. So, I quit on the spot, and reported it to the police. I have no idea if anything came of it. Edit. I also want to mention, this was a franchise. A location connected to corporate may have had a different stance. Who knows?